of this sort. Still, as I sat awaiting his arrival, I felt eager, very eager. I cannot tell you why. My hand, so utterly a stranger to the grasp of a kindred hand, clenched itself to repress a tremor with which impatience would fain have shaken it. I thought of my uncles, and as I was engaged in wondering whether Edward's indifference would equal the cold disdain I had always experienced from them, I heard the avenue gates open, wheels approach the house. Mr. Crimsworth was arrived, and after the lapse of some minutes, and a brief dialogue between himself and a servant in the hall, his tread drew near the library door. That tread alone announced the master of the house. I still retained some confused recollection of Edward as he was 10 years ago, a tall, wiry, raw youth. Now, as I rose from my seat and turned towards the library door, I saw a fine-looking and powerful man, light-complexioned, well-made, and of athletic proportions. The first glance made me aware of an air of promptitude and sharpness, shown as well in his movements as in his port, his eye, and the general expression of his face. He greeted me with brevity, and, in the moment of shaking hands, scanned me from head to foot. He took his seat in the morocco-covered armchair, and motioned me to another seat. "I expected you would have called at the counting house in the Close," said he, and his voice, I noticed, had an abrupt accent, probably habitual to him. He spoke also with a guttural northern tone, which sounded harsh in my ears, accustomed to the silvery utterance of the South. "The landlord of the inn where the coach stopped directed me here," said I. "I doubted at first the accuracy of his information, not being aware that you had such a residence as this." "Oh, it is all right," he replied, "only I was kept half an hour behind time, waiting for you, that is all. I thought you must be coming by the 8 o'clock coach." I expressed regret that he had had to wait. He made no answer, but stirred the fire as if to cover a movement of impatience. Then he scanned me again. I felt an inward satisfaction that I had not, in the first moment of meeting, betrayed any warmth, any enthusiasm; that I had saluted this man with a quiet and steady phlegm. "Have you quite broken with Tynedale and Seacombe?" he asked hastily. "I do not think I shall have any further communication with them. My refusal of their proposals will, I fancy, operate as a barrier against all future intercourse." "Why," said he, "I may as well remind you at the very outset of our connection, that no man can serve two masters. Acquaintance with Lord Tynedale will be incompatible with assistance from me." There was a kind of gratuitous menace in his eye, as he looked at me in finishing this observation. Feeling no disposition to reply to him, I contented myself with an inward speculation on the differences which exist in the constitution of men's minds. I do not know what inference Mr. Crimsworth drew from my silence; whether he considered it a symptom of contumacity, or an evidence of my being cowed by his peremptory manner. After a long and hard stare at me, he rose sharply from his seat. "To morrow," said he, "I shall call your attention to some other points; but now it is supper time, and Mrs. Crimsworth is probably waiting. Will you come?" He strode from the room, and I followed. In crossing the hall, I wondered what Mrs. Crimsworth might be. "Is she," thought I, "as alien to what I like as Tynedale, Seacombe, the Mrs. Seacombe, as the affectionate relative now striding before me? Or is she better than these? Shall I, in conversing with her, feel free to show something of my real nature? Or—" Further conjectures were arrested by my entrance into the dining room. A lamp, burning under a shade of ground glass, showed a handsome apartment, wainscoted with oak. Supper was laid on the table. By the fireplace, standing as if waiting our entrance, appeared a lady. She was young, tall, and well shaped. Her dress was handsome and fashionable. So much my first glance sufficed to ascertain. A gay salutation passed between her and Mr. Crimsworth. She chid him, half playfully, half poutingly, for being late. Her voice (I always take voices into the account in judging of character) was lively; it indicated, I thought, good animal spirits. Mr. Crimsworth soon checked her animated scolding with a kiss that still told of the bridegroom. They had not yet been married a year. She took her seat at the supper table in first-rate spirits. Perceiving me, she begged my pardon for not noticing me before, and then shook hands with me, as ladies do when a flow of good humor disposes them to be cheerful to all, even the most indifferent of their acquaintance. It was now further obvious to me that she had a good complexion, and features sufficiently marked but agreeable. Her hair was red, quite red. She and Edward talked much, always in a vein of playful contention. She was vexed, or pretended to be vexed, that he had that day driven a vicious horse in the gig, and he made light of her fears. Sometimes she appealed to me. "Now, Mr. William, isn't it absurd in Edward to talk so? He says he will drive Jack, and no other horse, and the brute has thrown him twice already." She spoke with a kind of lisp, not disagreeable, but childish. I soon saw also that there was more than girlish, a somewhat infantine expression in her by no means small features. This lisp and expression were, I have no doubt, a charm in Edward's eyes, and would be so to those of most men, but they were not to mine. I sought her eye, desirous to read there the intelligence which I could not discern in her face or hear in her conversation. It was merry, rather small. By turns I saw vivacity, vanity, coquetry, look out through its irid, but I watched in vain for a glimpse of soul. I'm no Oriental. White necks, carmine lips and cheeks, clusters of bright curls, do not suffice for me without that Promethean spark which will live after the roses and lilies are faded, the burnished hair grown grey. In sunshine, in prosperity, the flowers are very well, but how many wet days are there in life? November seasons of disaster, when a man's hearth and home would be cold indeed, without the clear, cheering gleam of intellect. Having perused the fair page of Mrs. Crimsworth's face, a deep, involuntary sigh announced my disappointment. She took it as a homage to her beauty; and Edward, who was evidently proud of his rich and handsome young wife, threw on me a glance, half ridicule, half ire. I turned from them both, and gazing wearily around the room, I saw two pictures set in the oak panelling, one on each side of the mantelpiece. Ceasing to take part in the bantering conversation that flowed on between Mr. and Mrs. Crimsworth, I bent my thoughts to the examination of these pictures. They were portraits, a lady and a gentleman, both costumed in the fashion of 20 years ago. The gentleman was in the shade; I could not see him well. The lady had the benefit of a full beam from the softly shaded lamp. I presently recognized her. I had seen this picture before in childhood. It was my mother, that and the companion picture being the only heirlooms saved out of the sale of my father's property. The face, I remembered, had pleased me as a boy, but then I did not understand it. Now I knew how rare that class of face is in the world, and I appreciated keenly its thoughtful yet gentle expression. The serious grey eye possessed for me a strong charm, as did certain lines in the features indicative of most true and tender feeling. I was sorry it was only a picture. I soon left Mr. and Mrs. Crimsworth to themselves. A servant conducted me to my bedroom. In closing my chamber door, I shut out all intruders, you, Charles, as well as the rest. Good-bye for the present. William Crimsworth. To this letter I never got an answer. Before my old friend received it, he had accepted a government appointment in one of the colonies, and was already on his way to the scene of his official labours. What has become of him since, I know not. The leisure time I have at command, and which I intended to employ for his private benefit, I shall now dedicate to that of the public at large. My narrative is not exciting, and above all not marvellous, but it may interest some individuals, who, having toiled in the same vocation as myself, will find in my experience frequent reflections of their own. The above letter will serve as an introduction. I now proceed. End of chapter 1 of The Professor.